You're listening to The Present Professional.
Get quiet to live loud.
Aligned action or a distraction. Those are the two options.
It's the best thing you can do for humanity.
A podcast for leaders navigating the human experience. Brought to you by Humessence. And I'm your host, John Marshall. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Present Professional. Today's conversation is about emotional intelligence, inspired leadership, and what it means to lead in a world that's asking more from us than technical skill or expertise alone. Right? And in Daniel Goleman's classic article, What Makes a Leader, makes the case that IQ and technical ability matter, but emotional intelligence is often what separates truly effective leaders from everyone else. And today's guest brings that conversation to life in a really multidimensional way. So today, I'm really excited to introduce you to Kevin Asbjornson, a global leadership development professional, executive coach, trusted advisor, keynote speaker, author, and performing artist. Kevin has worked with leaders and organizations across more than 70 countries, bringing together global business experience, leadership science, coaching, and the performing arts to help people create more meaningful connections and lead with greater purpose. He's also the managing director of Inspire, Imagine, Innovate, and has been recognized by Hogan Assessments among the top 1% of global executive coaches for 2026. Kevin, welcome to The Present Professional. I'd love to start with your journey. How did these threads of leadership, coaching, global work, and music all come together for you?
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be a guest on your podcast. That's an excellent question to begin with. If we go back to the beginning, I actually studied a dual career. One was in the area of performing arts because I am a pianist, composer, and international recording artist. The other one was international business with an emphasis on global leadership, global mindset. And so I decided, since I was given gifts in both those areas, I would maintain both a profession and an avocation. My profession tended to be, for the most part, the global leadership, global mindset. The music was my avocation, which is one of my passions, and I kept them in parallel, actually, from a very early age. When I completed my international MBA at the Thunderbird School of Global Management, I initially decided to go into international marketing and brand management. So I spent about 10 years with American Express and Hewlett-Packard. It was a good match for me, given my creativity and innovation attributes. At about the age of 30, while I was on assignment in Amsterdam, Holland, one of my mentors took me aside and said, "Kevin, we really appreciate your work as an international marketing and brand management specialist. We've also noticed you might have an aptitude for talent and leadership development. Have you ever thought longer term about transferring your skills, your passion, and your interest into that field?" So I sat down. It was a very good question. And I said, well, when I think about it, I really would rather develop talent and people than products and services. And so I began the process of transferring into that field. And when we make a commitment to life, life reciprocates. And so out of the blue, when I made the decision, one of my former clients reached out to me and said, "I don't know what you're doing with your life and career right now, but we'd like to introduce you to the co-founder of the Center for Creative Leadership," which at the time was ranked #1 in executive leadership development in the world. They have a beautiful campus here just south of Denver, Colorado. I interviewed with the co-founder, and she says, "We have an interesting offer for you. We have a lot of PhDs who don't have experience with international business or the language of business. And we have observed that you are a very good facilitator and speaker. If you come in and help us with our marketing and brand management, we will accredit you on all of the assessments that are necessary to be both an effective facilitator and global coach with our clients.
Wow. It's like you said, as you meet life, it meets you, right? Answers the questions that you have for it. And well, I guess that takes you into right, how you got into the talent development field and started forming right your own perspectives on leadership and being able to go around and starting this development journey, right? Transitioning from developing products to developing talent. And I'm curious what experiences throughout your career or even in the Center of Creative Leadership venture shaped how you think about leadership in general.
Good question. So when you transition into a new career, practice is very important. And on a weekly basis, I was in front of audiences of 20 to 30 people at a time, both as a facilitator, as a global executive coach. And that practice gave me the opportunity to to learn how to connect with the audience, which was different every single week.
Mm.
And oftentimes, out of the 30 people in the classroom, there were at least 10 different nationalities represented. I first was a very good student from all the IO psychologists and clinical psychologists, and I learned what they knew very well and very quickly. Then my performing artist acumen kicked in and said, wait a minute, most of our emphasis in the rest of the field is on the science of leadership, but there's actually an art and science to leadership. And those people who excel in their careers practice both the art and the science.
Mm.
And because the Center for Creative Leadership was ranked at that time #1 in the world, that provided me an opportunity to work with very distinguished people in the field, including Howard Gardner at Harvard University, who is the author of Intelligence Reframed, Multiple Intelligence for the 21st Century.
Mm.
And I read his book, realized there were 8 intelligences in the world, one of which was music, 2 of which comprised emotional intelligence. And I sat myself down and said, I am going to design a way of using the language of music to develop emotional intelligence in clients using my original piano solos.
Okay. Let's take me into this. Take me into this I don't want to get too deep into the technical aspects of the design, yet I would love to hear how in practice the language of music has supported developing emotional intelligence in your clients and leaders that you've experienced.
Yes, I'll keep it simple. One of the things I appreciated about my tenure with the Center for Creative Leadership is they had a beautiful grand piano in the Colorado campus, and they actually encouraged me to focus on evolving this because they were in the business of innovation and creativity. And so I said, well, as a pianist, there are 8 keys to every scale in music, and how might I leverage the 8 keys on a piano into the 8 keys of inspired leadership?
Mm.
And so I did a lot of research, reached out to Howard Gardner at Harvard, told him what I was doing, asked for some of his guidance on that. And I decided to bring a lot of research together from multiple people around the world that wasn't being brought together and
Mm.
actually created a model of the 8 keys to inspired leadership. Then, in my field as a performing artist, the most powerful performances are what we call performance in the round or theater in the round. And since I had this beautiful venue at the Colorado campus of the Center for Creative Leadership, I moved the piano out into the center of the room, and I placed circles of chairs around the piano, and I placed myself and the piano in the middle of the audience, and I began the process of saying, the true artistry of leadership is making meaningful connections with the audience. However, making meaningful connections doesn't come from the technical or the IQ. The connection that comes from the emotional side, because music is actually the international language of the heart and soul. And so what I decided to do is authentic leadership needed to be role modeled. So I used my original piano solos. And what I did is I set up one of the 8 keys at a time. I performed an original composition, and I asked the audience to listen. And at the end, I told them that I would ask them, what did you feel? What did you think? What did you hear? With no comment from me. I then circled the grand piano at the end of each original composition and asked them, what did you think? What did you feel? What came to your mind? Very surprisingly, John, what they came up with was actually the intention of the composition myself, and I could not believe it.
Wow.
So what they heard, what they felt, what they saw was actually what was behind the composition. And I immediately challenged them by saying, leaders inspire people. People motivate themselves. In the 20th century, we got it backwards. We actually thought our job was to motivate people. But leaders inspire people, and you do that through connecting with their heart and soul, not just their mind. And music was such a beautiful medium that just propelled me to put it together.
Wow. What a beautiful parallel to kind of the resonance of emotional intelligence, if you will. Because we've all been around leaders and people that we feel more inspired. We feel more comfortable. We feel more psychologically safe, even if sometimes they're not saying anything. Right? It might be how they say some things. It might be the music to their presence. So the fact that everyone in that room was able to get your intention from the composition, I mean, just really speaks to the power of resonance. Right? It speaks to the tone, the presence, the body language, the things that you pick up that are not just informative, spoken to you. That's such a beautiful story.
Well, and leveraging your use of the word tone, the second key to inspired leadership is what I call recognize the actual versus the intended impact of your voice. And using the Yamaha grand piano, I would demonstrate to them that prior to every performance, we, of course, tune the piano to ensure that each key is technically in tune, but we also tone the piano, meaning we can adjust the piano tension of the keys to slightly influence the sound to the audience. And I told them, oh, by the way, as leaders, people hear your tune, but they feel your tone. And if your tune is out of alignment with your tone, you're not connecting with your audience. So this is the first insight into what a world of a performing artist has to do with the world of a leader. Is your tune in alignment with your tone?
Wow. That could be a whole article in itself, if you haven't written it already.
Yes, well, since I was working primarily with quite senior level leaders and I was demonstrating vulnerability, they would reciprocate. And in the conversations after each composition, they would say, Kevin, I got to be honest with you. I lead quite a large group of people, and I'm pretty good about making sure that my tune is in order, but I've never thought about revisiting my tone. And I'm going to begin that process to see if I can bring the two together.
Mm, beautiful. Well, previously you mentioned, right, how the approach to, right, inspiring versus motivating, right? And how we had that backwards in the 20th century. And now, I mean, even saying 21st century leadership, the beginning of the 21st century to now is like, feels like a couple more centuries when it comes to the technology and the markets that we're working with right now. But for sake of juxtaposition, why does emotional intelligence matter so much in 21st century leadership versus the model that the model that emerged with industrial revolution and into business and the information era before?
That's a good question. So, another way of describing inspired leadership is human centric leadership. And what happened between the 20th and the 21st century is that around the world, people developed, became more self actualized. We have now, at any point in time, 5 different generations in the workplace with differing expectations. And in the case of my colleagues and I, we have clients in 70 different countries. And so the ability for us to connect with our audience, whether we're facilitating, coaching, or doing an assessment of a of a of a survey, is to make a connection with the person, and that goes beyond the data. It goes beyond the science. It goes with our willingness to step back, realize that our client actually has innate wisdom inside himself, and our role is not to tell the client anything, but to evoke an emotion from within that helps them to rediscover what is actually naturally inside them, truly naturally inside them.
Mm. Something tells me that as above, so below, the similar processes you are supporting leaders in, right, in having evoke something within them, it feels like it might be the same parallel to inspired leadership on their end with their teams and kind of evoking things within their employees, their peers, their organizations. Does that track?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the
Okay.
most prominent IO psychologists in the world, Dr. Robert Hogan, who I'm affiliated with as a Hogan practitioner, he defines leadership in terms of our ability to create high performing teams.
Mm.
And we do not create high performing teams without evoking the emotional element and informing the team that collectively our primary focus is creating synergy and collaboration. The 20th century exaggerated the role of competition. Now, I'm not saying that there's not a role for competition, but it was exaggerated. And in the classic definition of the ability of a leader to inspire teams to reach their fullest potential, that requires all 5 components of emotional intelligence.
Well, this good that you brought this up. And we've been saying emotional intelligence a lot, and resonance and inspiration and, evoking not just motivation, but like you said, synergy and collaboration across the team. So just to take one step back and clue everyone into the 5 pillars of emotional intelligence, can you introduce the audience to, I guess, maybe a 101 on emotional intelligence so that they can see the framework in front of them and then we can dive a little deeper?
Sure. So in my experience, Daniel Goleman, together with Howard Gardner, probably did the most comprehensive research into multiple intelligences And then what constitutes emotional intelligence? It just so happens that 2 of the 8 intelligences, which Howard Gardner identified, comprise emotional intelligence, and they're called intrapersonal intelligence, the degree to which we understand who we are and what motivates ourselves. And the second intelligence is called interpersonal intelligence, the ability to apply that self awareness in creating meaningful connections with others. And in the article I shared with you on what really makes a leader, and I appreciate you reading that, um, the 5 components of emotional intelligence in life and in work are comprised of self awareness and self regulation. Those first 2 comprise intrapersonal intelligence, the degree to which we understand ourself. And examples of what that looks like is self confidence, trustworthiness, integrity, trustworthiness, and openness to change. Those 2 are the foundation of emotional intelligence. The other 3 components actually make up interpersonal intelligence, the ability to connect with other people in a meaningful manner. And they're comprised of motivation, empathy, and social skills. And examples of what that looks like is strong drive to achieve, organizational commitment, um, expertise in building and retaining talent, uh, cross-cultural sensitivity, which is a primary part of my career, persuasiveness. And what's interesting is when I am working with and evaluating managers and leaders, I ask them, how aware do you think you are of your current level of emotional intelligence? And the reason I ask that question is that while we're born with our IQ, we're not born with our EQ or emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is something that we must learn from experience throughout life and develop. And that's misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually use one of the gold standard self-assessments of emotional intelligence that my clients complete, and it actually plays back to them where they actually fall along the 5 components, and then we benchmark them against a global normative database of other people. So they see where they fall in relation to others. And surprisingly, John, many people are not aware of those 2 intelligences within the model. And that if you don't have good intrapersonal intelligence or strategic self awareness, as Dr. Hogan calls it, you're going to be impeded in your ability to create meaningful connections with others. So I often have to redirect them back to the beginning and say, well, we actually need to focus on developing your self awareness and self regulation before we make progress with motivation, empathy, and social skill.
Mm. So just to take one step back, we have the model laid out in front of us, and I mean the research is out there. We've been hearing about emotional intelligence a lot. This isn't the first time we've had a conversation about it on the podcast either. And we know that it contributes to success, high performance. I mean, the business results are there. It's so clear that emotional intelligence is the key differentiator in leadership success and I would say organizational success as well. Yet at the same time, I feel like there's this resistance. There's like some folks will lean into it. Okay, I hear that this is necessary. I hear that this works, but we're focused on performance. We're focused on delivering results here. Like I feel like I need to be stronger and more assertive and more, and not that those are mutually exclusive. Like you can be emotionally intelligent and assertive. Yet at the same time, I feel like there's this old school not even old school mentality, more like Western capitalist mentality of emotional intelligence being second to high performance when the data clearly says the opposite. So what do you say to someone listening that's saying, okay, I hear about this all the time? You know, what would you say to someone that could maybe finally convince them to say, okay, let me take a look at this?
Good question. So let me first respond to that language that you used, and that is Western capitalism actually put the cart before the horse rather than the horse before the cart. All right. That was a classic blind spot, but no one really challenged them because the pressure was always on results, 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 what they did rather than how they went about doing it. So that's a classic blind spot of Western capitalism. That's point number one. Point number two, and of course, we do have clients who have skepticism or healthy skepticism. What we do is to help them kind of enhance their perspective, is to say, well, we're going to interview people that you work with, and we're going to provide you a 360-degree perspective on the actual impact of how you lead and your behavior. When we collect that, and we can do that through various ways, there's wonderful 360-degree surveys that are out there. There's a section in there for rating the person on a scale of 1 to 5, but most importantly, John, there's a verbatim comment section where, without any filter from us, the people put in their own words the actual impact of the leader on them. And when they read those comments, they are humbled, they are beside themselves, because no one has ever taken an approach of saying how you lead is just as important as the results that you deliver. And then, since there's so much research by my peers and colleagues, we can actually statistically correlate how that 360-degree feedback results in leadership effectiveness. And of the four quadrants of leadership, and I think this is a good point to bring this in to further answer your question. There are four quadrants of what the best leaders look like in the world. They are achievement focus, inspiring, strategic, and emotional intelligence. And these four quadrants are actually divided into a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. On the left hemisphere side are what we call the achievement focus and the strategic. That's the what in the business. The right hemisphere is inspiring and emotional intelligence, and that's the how side of the equation. Consistently, our clients score higher on the left hemisphere because that's the way they've been brought up, and that's the way their senior leadership has role modeled. It's what we do, not how we go about doing it. And when we share with them that innovation and survival and being competitive has more to do with the right side of the equation than the left side of the equation, they start saying, all right, I need to reevaluate the energy I'm spending on these four quadrants. And we actually assist them in saying, how do you reallocate your energy? Because it's all about managing energy, not time, that results in truly effective leaders. And by bringing this in very practical terminology to their attention, then they begin to see the light.
Really comprehensive. To look outside to look outside for your impact and to see and let the impact drive your motivation. Let the impact drive where you want to go next. So I'm thinking someone, sitting here listening to this right now that says, okay, maybe I should take a look at how my leadership style, how I navigate decisions, my workday impacts others. So I'm going to go ahead and hire a coach to do a 360. I'm going to go ahead and do a 360 assessment to see my impact on others. Right? That's one way to start. And then there's also just the folks that are interested right now to just, well, let me just go right into it and see my emotional intelligence. What would you recommend as the first step for them? Or I know you have an assessment that you recommend as well, but practically, do they visit some website? Do they have to go through a coach? Like, how does someone practically access the assessment that you recommend?
That's a very good question. And so, to avoid the cart before the horse syndrome, we always begin with a particular self assessment. And there's not just one right answer for that. Okay. A self assessment might be the Hogan Leadership Forecast Series, it might be the MHS EQI 2.0 Emotional Intelligence Survey. I personally am certified in 30 different assessments, and rather than just using the same
Wow.
one all the time, I try to match the assessment with where my client is, and more importantly, with what their organization is expecting of them. And this is what we call strategic self-awareness. Based on a very validated, reliable model globally, here's where you actually fall as a leader, as an emotionally intelligent person. And the initial coaching conversations are all around that. We take it a step further and we say, let's bring in your annual performance review and evaluation with your manager, or that result of the client engagement survey that your business unit is using. What do you notice is similar between the results in your self-assessment survey, your annual evaluation, and the client engagement survey? They are surprised to see what alignment there is between the three, because what comes out in the self-assessment, independent of which one we use, is exactly what their manager has encouraged them to develop, what their people have been encouraged them to develop. And so we bring in all of those perspectives so that there's a natural motivation for them to say, okay, I do want to make a difference in this. How do I move forward?
Wow.
Then, in due time, we don't do this automatically. In due time, we say, well, would you like to really know what other people think about you? Because what we think of ourselves is oftentimes different than impression of others. And we call this the difference between identity and reputation. Identity is who we think we are. Reputation is what others actually say we are. And
Mm.
believe it or not, there's a very frequent discovery that their identity is not in alignment with their reputation, and they want to bring those closer in alignment. And then we say, well, the best way to do that is through a 360 assessment or a behavioral interview, because the data doesn't lie, and we don't filter or edit any of those comments from the people you work with, including customers. Some people actually give it to their customer.
If you could give me one moment, I want to introduce you to today's sponsor, my company, Humescence. By listening to this show and putting these ideas into practice, you're already someone who cares deeply about culture, leadership, and how people work together. And at Humescence, we provide growth stage organizations with training and coaching to build the systems and leadership practices that build these ideas into their culture as they scale. To learn more about this, visit humescence.com and schedule a free consultation with me or any member of my team. So thank you so much for listening. Now, back to the show. Wow. Closing the gap between identity and reputation, and I guess emotional intelligence within there, starting to wake up to those differences, like what you think you're putting out there versus what's received. So a client starts this process with you. They are getting their emotional intelligence results. They are getting some results from the 360 assessment. They're seeing the disparity between their identity and reputation. So, can you share a success story or what the process looked like for one of your clients that saw that gap and experienced this process of closing it? Was that 6 months of coaching? Was that 2 years before they said, wow, we've experienced some congruency here and I'm seeing the results? Like, what does the process look like once the awareness has been evoked, if you will?
So those are two questions in one. Let me answer both of them. When we look at research and science, which is very important to us, it actually takes about 6 to 9 months for people to make the refinements and adjustments in order for other people to observe them. And notice I use the words refinement and adjustment. I do not use the word change. We are not in the business of
Mm,
changing people or fixing people. We're in the business of helping them increase their strategic self awareness, their emotional intelligence, so that there can be a greater impact on the people that they're working with and attempting to lead. And so, over the course of a 6 to 9 month engagement, um, again, we start with the right self assessment. If their organization is progressive, they will put a workshop around this so that they interact with peers during this process because peer to peer based learning is very powerful. It's one thing to hear from me, but when they're in a class with 30 of their peers and their peers are bringing up very similar things to what they saw in their assessments, what that really hits home for them.
mm,
Okay. And then we encourage our clients over that period of 6 to 9 months to break it down into a step by step sequence. Don't try to do everything at once. Let's just start and have a couple of objectives for the maybe the first 3 months, the second 3 months, and if we have 9 months, the third 3 months. And during that, we encourage them to informally check in with people so that they get real-time feedback on how they're doing. That's
mm,
important. What's the real time feedback they're getting on that? And because we design that in, they are more motivated because they're seeing the difference in the words of the people they're trying to lead or make a difference.
got it. That this real time feedback is one of the most important things you see for kind of fostering that motivation, keeping the drive to improve their emotional intelligence going.
Yes, and this is
Yeah.
a very common theme. And in the initial conversation, I asked my client, what is it that you would really like to achieve, in your
Mm,
words, at the end of this coaching engagement, at the end of this leadership development engagement? Because it's important that they put it in their words.
mm-hmm,
And then the entire engagement is designed around that so that we don't wait until the end of the 6 months or the 9 months. We have milestones built in. So along the way, they're seeing progress. And it's, for the most part, positive and constructive. And that speaks louder than anything my colleagues or I would say to them because the people are speaking up. And
mm-hmm,
in between the conversations, depending on if it's a 3, 6, or 9 month engagement. Of course, there are multiple conversations with me and as the executive coach, and I just ask them, "What are you hearing from other people? What are they telling you?"
mm-hmm,
And they can't wait to share with me the stories that people have told them um,
mm,
that just really motivate them to continue on that path. But again,
mm,
keep in mind, we're not in the business of fixing people, not in the business of changing people. This has to be kind of what we call intrinsic motivation
mm-hmm,
from within
mm-hmm.
in order to see results without on the outside.
I love that. Refinements.
Yes.
We're not changing people. We're helping them be more strategic, right? The Now they're getting this feedback. They're excited to tell you these stories. I'm curious, what are some of the specific refinements that are leading to some of these reactions, these stories that clients are coming to tell you? Um, Anything to share there that would be something specific that a client did in a refinement versus the way that they used to do things that brought this kind of external feedback?
Yes, there are three very consistent observations that we make. The first one we've already talked about in the podcast, which is for the first time, they've understood the difference between the tune and the tone of their voice. And they've actually been tone deaf until they start working with us.
Hmm.
Okay? And the first story that we hear is, I just cannot believe that I've exaggerated the tune and the what it is that we're trying to do and the KPIs I'm expecting of my people with how I go about doing that. So that's the first adjustment that we hear about, tune versus tone, and they're leaning a little bit more into the tone of how they lead rather than the tune. That's the first observation. The second observation, especially in Western countries, because we work in all geographies, is that for the first time, somebody's challenged them on the difference between what's important and what's urgent. And in Western cultures, especially the United States, there's a blind spot that has spilled over from the 20th century into the 21st century, which we call the FedEx syndrome. The senior leaders don't realize that there's a significant difference between important and urgent, so they create a culture of everything being urgent that results in additional pressure, stress, and duress on the people. And I just challenge them directly and say, by the way, not everything needs to be FedEx overnight. You need to start role modeling what's important to your people. What's an A? What's a B? What's a C? You need to hold yourself accountable to that. You need to hold others accountable to that and stop thinking everything is urgent. That's the second. And that's especially in Western cultures, including the United States. The third one has to do with what we call pace. Slow your pace down. Everything doesn't have to be done immediately. Slow the pace down in terms of how you're communicating with people, your expectations in terms of how long something will take. And oh, by the way, when you look behind the scenes, everything takes longer than we initially think it will take. So just by slowing down the pace, you tend to pay more attention to your audience. And remember, as a performing artist from the age of 5, I've been fine-tuning the craft of understanding and connecting with my audience. One of the ways of doing that is making sure my pace is in alignment with my audience. Otherwise, I might lose them and leave them behind.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. That really hits home about tangible refinements people are making that are being noticed, shifting their reputation, where they're getting feedback in real time on. So to the other person that's listening who is a champion of this, right? Maybe they have already read several books on emotional intelligence. Maybe they've worked with a coach in the past and they are the champions within their organization, yet are having a harder time selling it upline. Maybe the HR VP or HR director that's listening that's saying, I know which teams need this. I know which leaders need this. Right? How do I sell this to my organization and kick off my first pilot?
Good question. So that comes up quite frequently. We believe that the use of appropriate data and research is the way forward. I gave you one of many examples. I have share with you in advance the brilliant article entitled "What Makes a Leader" by Daniel Goleman. Well, we have a plethora of articles such as that, and we equip that individual with the right article, sometimes two, to begin the process of influencing people internally. Because when the article is read, it's based on data and research on a global, longitudinal manner. People start paying attention to that.
Mm-hmm.
And we say, oh, by the way, we believe in benchmarking. And so going back to identity versus reputation, one of the ways you make progress is to understand that the identity and reputation is probably out of alignment within the organization. And you want to start bringing that back into alignment, not by demeaning people or demoralizing people, but by introducing the right science, introducing the right data. And remember what I shared with you when we first met today. There's an exaggeration on the science of everything, including leadership, but there's an art and science to leadership. So we equip those internal influencers with both the art and the science. And then if they want, sometimes I'm invited in to the conversation to speak with the people they're attempting to influence in HR or senior leadership. And it's pretty difficult for them to challenge the data because I said, hey, this is not my opinion. This is not my perspective. I have a lot of perspectives, but this is data on a global basis. And one of the ones we use is based on 100,000 similar managers and leaders. That's a pretty significant global database to put up there. And so I say, I hear that you're interested in developing more effective and impactful leaders. Well, let's start with the data on what the best leaders in the world really look like in very practical terms, very easy to read English language. And then using the 4 quadrants model of leadership, I actually give them the exercise of saying, I want you to be very honest with me. As you step back and take a look at your organization, and you now know what the 4 quadrants of effective leadership look like, I want you to order those. I want you to tell me which one of those you think your current leadership is most proficient in, second most, third most, and last. And notice I use the word proficient, not competence. And so they come up with a 1, 2, 3, 4, or an A, B, C, D. And I say, well, as we take a look at that, you've got your entire leadership team focusing on the what of the business, not the why and the future of the business. And so you have an imbalance. Here's how we could go about adjusting that imbalance so that you have a more centered approach of the 4 quadrants with your leadership team. That works quite effectively.
This is really helpful when it comes to someone being able to introduce a specific project scope. Like, let's introduce this initiative and benchmark it against certain data and have a pilot cohort, start developing people. But I'm curious on the best cases organizationally, what are the best organization culture setups that promote emotional intelligence and maybe even have it built into operationally, how people are hired, how people are promoted? I guess, what are the best cultural systems that you've seen produce successful, like a successful language of emotional intelligence throughout the organization? So I guess to put it simply, it's like, what from an emotional intelligence perspective, like, what are the best organizations doing right culturally and systems wise that others are not?
Good question. So if we lift it above the terminology of emotional intelligence or inspiring leadership, we notice several things that differentiate these organizations. The first one is they believe and invest in a learn-it-all culture rather than a know-it-all culture. And unfortunately, we still have, especially in the United States, too many know-it-all cultures where they think they have all the right answers, and that immediately cuts them off from the fact that no one has all of the right answers, especially in the year 2026 with everything that's going on in the world. So that's the first observation I make, is that they have a learn-it-all culture, number one. Number two, they're willing to invest in, I like your word, pilot. Oftentimes, our clients do start with a pilot because that's a nice way to, do your best in the initial design, but there's always something to learn. And then refine from the pilot and do that sequentially moving forward. And oftentimes, a successful pilot will result in year after year repetition of what was fine-tuned originally. Okay. The next thing we observed is that the C level, or the highest level of the organizations, want to be involved. And so quite often I invite either the CEO, COO, CFO, it doesn't matter which one, to co-facilitate with me up front.
Wow.
Co-facilitate with me. Okay. And so on the first day, if a workshop is involved, not a workshop isn't always involved. On the first day, I will put the C-level officer in front of the group of emerging and high potential leaders, and in his or her own words, not my words, not other people's words, in his or her own words, describe briefly his or her leadership journey, missteps along the way, and why he or she feels that's imperative that money be invested in the future leadership of the organization. And I also invite that person back at the end of the workshop to do something similar on the back end, because that's commitment from the C level.
Mm-hmm. Commitment, and what an environment of psychological safety. Hearing
Oh,
your
yeah.
C-suite leader say something like that at the beginning of this. So it's humble. It invites you to come as you are, and it shows that this is a priority at the highest levels, not just another training program because we need to train our leaders.
Yes, and on day one, I intentionally put the C-level officer first, not me or not my colleague. They need to hear from the C-level person, him or herself. We do a little bit of prompting of the C-level person. They usually come with a very nice short PowerPoint to kind of back up what they're saying. And then after that session, when he or she hands it over to me, then I start articulating how everything within the workshop or the initiative is designed around what was shared by the CEO, and most importantly, how we're going to measure it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key thing, how we're gonna measure it. And I'm not just talking about annual performance evaluations. How are we going to measure it along the way so that we are really seeing a difference in the impact of others?
And that takes it to, yes, the CEO's message is powerful and that's compelling and inspiring, but is the rubber hitting the road, right? And where the rubber meets the road, I think, is where it's actually assessed, right? Where we're actually measuring it, where we're promoting against it, where it's seen as an organizational priority, not just by words, but by action, assessment, and promotion.
And the real sharp ones, they want to know what their people are going to experience. And so sometimes the very senior leadership team of 3, 4, or 5, they actually ask my colleagues and I to do the assessment, do the debriefing on them, set up the 4-quadrant model of leadership so that they at least understand the framework around what it is that we're doing. And then at the back end, when they're speaking in the workshop, they can speak to that. And they say, here's what I learned from the assessment that I did with Kevin,
Mm-hmm.
talked about And I'm hoping that the same thing happens for all of you. That's very powerful. Very powerful.
Well, I mean, there's so much that we've covered already, and there's so many more things that I want to ask you about. So you're going to have to come on again as a guest again for sure. But I want to ask you just one question, just stepping out of where we've been so far, and just like, what gives you hope about the future of leadership?
I'm glad you asked that question, John, because when you look at some of the research that comes from third parties, I'm thinking specifically of the annual Edelman Trust Barometer report. In the world, trustworthiness is at its lowest level. In the world,
Mm,
trustworthiness is at its lowest level. There are other reports that come from Gallup, for example, that clearly articulate the dissatisfaction of people that work for corporations and organizations. And the number one reason for the dissatisfaction is their manager, their direct report manager or leader. The third thing that gives me hope is that the citizens of the world, whether they work for corporations or are entrepreneurs, are beginning to realize that they are responsible for their life, career, and well being. It's not the job of their employer, it's not the job of their manager, it's not the job of somebody else. It's my responsibility. And therefore, when they come to us, they articulate what they would like to accomplish so that they are back in the driver's seat of their life, career, and well-being. And notice the three words I used, because it's not just about business, life, career, and well-being. We coach to all three of those because since you're a father now of two, what we do applies to family life and parental life. The foundation of how we lead ourselves and our family influences what we do with others in the workplace. Does that resonate with you?
certainly, it's all connected, right? There's no compartmentalization when it comes to the moment, right?
Yes, and I have a lot of clients who are lifelong clients of mine, and after the first engagement, they will come back to me and say, um, "I've definitely learned how to be a more inspiring or impactful leader, but you surprise me because I'm actually a better parent, a better father, a better mother, a better partner, and I wasn't aware of how they're all intertwined." And so that's what gives me hope and inspiration is that slowly but surely the world is waking up that we have to let go of the 20th century. The cart was put before the horse would cart was put before the horse. That model wasn't as effective as people think it is, and it doesn't work in a time where we have multiple cultures in the global workforce, 5 different generations. That's what gives me hope.
Wow. Wow. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this, Kevin. Where can listeners find you and your work?
Well, our website is inspireimagineinnovate.com.
Good.
inspireimagineinnovate.com. I'm also on LinkedIn under my name, Kevin Asbjornson. And one thing your listeners might be interested in, I'm actually the executive editor of a Transformation Insights blog, and that can be accessed in its totality at no charge um, in the website in the Transformation Insights section. And so my colleagues and I try to publish leading edge, future thinking articles that help bring people along with
Mm,
this process. And we just keep them all posted there, accessible, free of charge to kind of encourage their thought process.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing that. And listeners, we will be putting links to everything that Kevin just said, as well as the articles that we've mentioned in the podcast today. So you'll be able to find those in the show notes. So thank you so much for being here, Kevin. And listeners, thank you so much for tuning into The Present Professional. We will see you next time.
Thank you, John, and thank you to your listeners.
All right.